Welcome to Before First Gear, a series where I sit down with top racers to learn how they got started, honed their skills, and some of the unique challenges they faced along the way. Every racer has a story, and I look forward to hearing it. Kyle, I guess, we chatted for a bit before this. We met about 10 years ago or so, but the premise of what I'm trying to understand is how you got to those first inflection points in your career and what you consider those inflection points. So maybe you can take 5 minutes or so max and just kind of go into some information around how you actually got started.
Sure. So quick synopsis on the early years. Grew up in an average household. My father was a bricklayer, sort of worked hard, physically for every penny, every dollar that he made. He was always very supportive of me. I was, at a young age, a hockey player, as most Canadians are. It was about age 10 that I found a passion for auto racing. That came through an uncle of mine who raced motorcycles. Anyways, the one uncle took me to the go-kart track, and that's really sort of how I got exposed to the sport. And I think I took that for granted because, fast forward, to my professional career, I often get asked that question, how did you get started? And I say, well, I got started in a go-kart. But it goes one step further, and it's like, you had to get exposed to it. Like, not many kids even get exposed, like get taken to that rental go-kart track or see it on TV, until it's too late, really. They're in their teens or their 20s, but before they actually know what auto racing is. So anyways, I was exposed at a young age, which was great.
I think they get exposed to it maybe, and they can go to those rental places, but it's sort of that next level that you're actually getting competitive, and your dad's got to be involved or your uncle involved, and there's mechanics and money involved, and right. It's like, how you build it up from there?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I like that. So, it's exposure to it, and then it's the support, really. Yeah. I was exposed, and then I remember sitting, at a dinner table with my dad and my uncle, and I said, I want to do this now. I want to race a go-kart. I want to, get my feet wet with it. And my dad was fully supportive. I don't know if it was days or weeks or months, but next thing you know, we had a go-kart in the garage, and it was, I think, about 30 years old. We took it to the track, and I wasn't even allowed to race it. It was, most go-karts were after animals. I don't know, but we then purchased a proper go-kart, a used one, and got started. Fell in love with the sport, had some success, at a regional sort of club level, and then carried on. But that was how I got my start. That was how I was exposed to it, and I had a supportive dad. From there, it was, became serious. This became like, more than just a hobby. It became something that I wanted to do for a living, and I knew that at a young age. I'm now 11, 12 years old, getting pretty competitive racing go-karts in Ontario and across Canada. And it was, starting to cost real money at this point. And, I wasn't from a family that could just simply, give me an unlimited budget to go racing. I had to sort of figure out how to move forward, really. I had an opportunity from one of Ontario's sort of top go-karting teams, Cameron Motorsports, and they took me under their wing, provided go-karts, engines. I think at the time we were responsible for entry fees and tires, so it was pretty affordable for us.
What is the benefit to them for that?
It was kind of the beginning of what we see now in go-karting, where you have these massive like circus tents full of like one team has 60 go-karts underneath the tent, and that seems to be the way it is now. When I was racing go-karts in like 2000 to 2006, it was just starting that way. We first showed up, me and my dad, with a snowmobile trailer and a go-kart in the back of it.
Yeah.
And then when I got onto this factory team, Cameron Motorsports, there was probably 12 go-kart drivers on the team, and the team would financially support, let's say, a few top karters to then bring customers through the door and sell customer seats in a sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense, because I guess the reality is their running costs, like there's pretty good economies of scale there, right? It's like, the 11th and 12th cart that they have in that team, it's probably pretty minimal expense at that point for them.
Sure. Yeah. And So that allowed me to now be in a competitive environment. I had a new go-kart, I had new engines, and we started traveling, down to the U.S. and racing all the big races. It was still relatively affordable given that we just were responsible for entry fees and tires and our travel expenses. But then it got to a point where we were, winning shifter kart races, and it was like, okay, time to move on from go-karting and what's the next step? How do we get into a proper car? All the top go-karters across North America at that point that were going the single-seater direction. Formula BMW was a major championship at that time, like around that 2005 to 2010. There was a Formula BMW North America, Europe, I think Asia. So that's, of course, where I thought I had to go. I went to Spain because they had like a young driver, like a BMW young driver program in a sense, almost like a school that you needed to get your license.
Was it like a
Did
shootout at that point, or was it a?
No, I think that was just to get like your license or something. It wasn't a real shootout. There was no prize awarded for that, but it was just sort of an entry point into the series. At that point, you start contacting teams. Hey, I was just in Valencia, Spain. I did the BMW, course or whatever. I'm looking to go racing. Every team was, I don't know, 180, 190,000 up to 350,000 was kind of the range, if I recall. Far more money than, I could ever get my hands on, that my family could, support me with. So it was pretty quickly a no, like this is just not going to be an option for me. But I learned at that point that I had to work hard. Like this wasn't going to be handed to me. And I remember sitting in my dad's little office in our basement, and I pulled up contact information for every single BMW car dealership across Canada. It was, I don't know, like 40, 50 dealerships. And I just started calling one after the next. Hi, my name's Kyle Marcelli. I'm a young Canadian up and coming race car driver. I want to compete in the Formula BMW Championship. Are you interested to support me? And it was just, one no after the next. So I learned that, you're going to have a lot of doors closed in your face before you get a yes. Didn't get a single yes. It was all no's. So at that point, I had to give up on my dreams of going to Formula BMW. I had some influence at the time from some professional race car drivers. Ron Fellows, I remember being one of them. David Emperingham. These are some Canadian professional drivers. And they directed me to a Formula Ford, the Ontario Formula Ford Championship.
How did Ron Fellows is a pretty well known guy? How'd that come about from karting? You got the introduction to him?
Yeah, sorry. So
Okay.
Ron was pretty involved in the Canadian go-karting scene around that 2005 time, and he actually had a championship that he was involved in called, and that he brought Sunoco involved into as well. It was called the Sunoco Ron Fellows Karting Championship, and it was one of Ontario. I think it was just an Ontario championship. But anyways, it was a pretty major championship regionally. So I had competed in that.
Got it.
Won races in that, and got to meet Ron. He ended up picking one or two drivers each year, sponsoring them through Sunoco and putting them in that Bridgestone F2000 series. So that was one opportunity I had. That was actually the very first opportunity I had. That was in 2006.
Bridgestone 2000 series. That was associated with the Bridgestone Racing School at the time. I think that was at Mosport.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So a fleet of 1985 Renard open wheel race cars with like a street tire. Yeah, you'd see anywhere from 12 to 16 sort of cars, in a race. I think it might have been six or eight races in a year. So
Sure.
Ron would pick one or two drivers from his karting championship, sponsor them, and put them in that series. So I got selected in 2006, did that. Daniel Morad was another Canadian driver that got selected that same year. He won, and I finished second in that championship.
Where's Daniel Morad now?
He just won the Rolex 24 at Daytona. So he's doing all right. So did that in 2006, but it didn't really lead to much. It was it was experience, at the very least. It was a wonderful opportunity.
Well,
But
you're also what, like
I
14
was
years old?
16, actually. Yep, 16.
Okay.
Anyways, then it was decided Ontario Formula Ford is the place for me. So I got introduced to a team that actually just lived 30 minutes down the road, or was based 30 minutes down the road from me, Brian Graham Racing. And Brian said the budget's 50,000. Okay, this seems doable. My dad just basically said, my Rolodex is yours. It was a little black leather binder. It was full of business cards, and I just started calling one business card after the next. Hi, I'm Tony Marcelli's son, Kyle, and I'm a race car driver. I'm trying to raise some money to do the Ontario Formula Ford Championship. Not looking for much, just like sponsoring your local soccer team or local hockey team. A couple $100 will do. And I got like $25,000 from a number of people, just giving me $100, $500. So I was halfway there. I had a construction company by the name of Lafarge, who is global. They're in 85 countries. They gave me $500 that year.
I've
I
heard of
had a
those guys. They're like
yeah
a multi-billion-dollar
yeah yeah
conglomerate. They could
yeah.
have done better than $500, but
Well, I'll get to that later.
yeah.
But a roofing company, I think I got 10,000 from. So
Wow.
I got the 50,000. We were off to the races, and I won the championship that year, my rookie season. And that sort of launched the career a little bit. From there, I stayed with Brian and went to the U.S. and did what was known as the USF 2000 series.
Sure. Kyle, before you get into that, I have a question for you, because a lot of this whole series is about education in a way. So it's like you go in and you sit in a Formula Ford and then you win the championship. Like, at what point did you get some education on this? You obviously had some karting experience. You did the Formula BMW kind of school in Valencia, so they teach you a bit about racing dynamics. Like, did you have coaching? How did you learn this stuff?
No coach. Coaches didn't really exist at that time, really. Trial and error, and crash and learn from it and don't do it again. So the Formula Ford, what was unique about that car is it was a 4-speed H pattern gearbox, but you could left foot brake these cars. So coming out of a go-kart, that was kind of natural for me. I was used to left foot braking, so I just had to use the clutch to sort of get going, and then I was good.
Because yeah.
So on the
But
upshifts,
how do you left foot brake with that?
so on the upshifts, it's just a small lift on the throttle, and you kind of pull it back, and then cross and up into third, and then back again into fourth. On the downshifts, you have to just a little blip of the throttle as you're moving the shifter from fourth to third, third to second. And it was pretty seamless if you get it right. If you
Sure.
get it wrong, then you would kind of chatter the rear
Yeah.
axle a little bit. But yeah, there was no aerodynamics on the car, so again, something that I was used to from a go-kart. You just kind of slide the thing around a bunch. No ABS, so you're locking tires again, kind of like a go-kart. So in my opinion, it's the perfect step, into a car. You're just dealing with a lot more weight, which is something that you have to learn to manage as you work your way up. Drafting was a big thing, especially at a circuit like Mosport, a very fast racetrack. And that series just taught me so much to pass, to be passed, to be side by side, to draft, to crash.
Yeah.
I remember leading a race all by myself, just drove off the track and crashed, with no excuse.
If you crashed at that point, who's paying for that? Or it's
I
relatively
was,
cheap.
I
Okay.
was, but yeah, it was pretty cheap. Yeah, so that was 2007, and we won the championship. And then with Brian, we took the next step, which was going to the U.S. and running the USF 2000 series. So we did that, and the budget was now 125,000. So of course I went back to everybody that gave me a few $100s and asked them for another few hundred, and I think they all renewed. That $500 Lafarge sponsorship turned into 35,000. There was a number of others. There was a company in my town that sold ATVs and dirt bikes, and my dad waited in the truck, and I went inside, gave them my sales pitch, and I ended up, wiping, cleaning the ATVs 3 days a week in exchange for $5,000 in sponsorship. So it was just a hustle, really, and got the 125. did USF 2000 and finished third in the championship. And then that was kind of the point in my career where the next step was a huge budget increase to do like Formula Atlantic or Indy Lights. It was $500,000, $750,000. At that point, I went to Lafarge and I said, hey, can we can we increase the sponsorship again? And I think we got it up to 100, but that was that was the limit. So, I mean, at that point, I was 17, 18 years old. I started to homeschool myself. I learned how to put the business hat on and go into these, corporate businesses in the boardrooms and try to sell myself, try to be of value to the company, either make them money or save them money. With Lafarge, we filmed a commercial. And this idea came to light because I was in the elevator, being taken up to the boardroom, and they had like a workplace safety video playing in the elevator, kind of a boring, video. And so I pitched them on the idea of filming like a pit stop. They had some new products, and this is a much bigger story. I won't go into all the details, but Lafarge globally introduced some new products. There was like 4 new products, and every country was trying to push sales on these products. So we decided to film a commercial, a pit stop, and all the pit crew had the names of these products on their back, and then the race car peels out of the pit box, and it says the race is on. And this was just all internal marketing. It went to all of like their sales staff on their internal websites, and it was kind of like an internal bit of energy for this Canadian division to sell these products. The race is on. They had posters put up in all their offices. And that led to the $100,000 sponsorship. But in terms of my open wheel career, the dream kind of died right there. It was I couldn't generate $500,000 or $750,000.
Do you remember who came in first on that series that year?
I do. Yeah, his name is Anders Krohn. He's a Norwegian, very good driver. He had a better car though.
Is he? And how about second?
Second, yes, was a guy named Johnny Baker from England.
Okay.
Yes, and
so that was really a global series at that point. Then, like, it was Road to Indy at that year, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, like again, it was kind of around that time you started to see a lot of European drivers coming over to go to IndyCar. Like the Formula One dream was sort of set aside, and you see a lot of these Europeans coming to America. The budgets maybe were cheaper, the opportunities were greater, and there was more of a pathway to IndyCar. So the USF 2000 was the first step.
So at that point, then you're cashed out from open wheel. I think it's safe to say that like the open wheel budgets for whatever reason are so much more than sports cars, even though there's a lot less body and weight to them. But I guess they're unique builds, and I get that. What happens next? Because now you're 18 years old, 19 years old. You've got to figure out then you want to continue to pursue this career. Did you have a point in time when you kind of were like, well, shit, maybe I should look in a different direction outside of motorsports? I mean,
no, I can honestly say that I've never thought about anything else other than being a race car driver. I was so determined that this is what I wanted to do, what I had to do. It sort of just became all I knew. Thankfully, I was able to produce some results on the racetrack that sort of kept the dream alive. I think it'd be a very different story if I was finishing last and still only ever thought about being a race car driver.
It's not even finishing last. I mean, it's if you're even finishing outside the top 2 or 3, right, not on the podium at that point, with the guys coming with no budget really. I mean, you've got to perform in every race, don't you?
Yeah, no, you do. You're right. Yeah. I mean, you had to get the results, but it just sort of helped keep the dream alive. It wasn't something. I never had anybody tell me that it wasn't going to happen. Nobody ever sort of kicked me down or pushed me down and said, you don't have what it takes, or it's too big of a dream, or you don't have the money, or you don't have the contacts. I'm thankful for that I didn't have any negativity. Seemed to be just a lot of positive people that I surrounded myself with, whether it was family or sponsors or race teams. Everyone was very encouraging, and I was probably my biggest critic and enemy, and still am to date. Like if I have a bad day, a bad weekend, I don't want to get out of bed. Like it just eats you alive. And you may have heard the saying, like the highs are high, the lows are low. The highs only last 24 hours. Like you win a race, the next day you're kind of back to training,
Yeah.
focusing on the next one. If you lose a race or you crash, that lingers and sticks with you until your next race. Like it just eats you alive. At least it's the case for me.
So this sounds like a relatively large inflection point for you, because I know that at the point that I had met you in 2016 or so, you had driven a Ferrari 458, I want to say at the time. But so let's talk about then, out of money, USF 2000 is done. How do you get into sports cars?
Yes. So again, it got to a point where, I gave up on the open wheel dream. I figured, how am I going to make a career at this? I didn't care what I was racing. I just wanted to race, for a living. Again, those same influencers, mentors, Ron Fellows, David Empringham. There's another guy, Peter Gibbons. It was a Canadian stock car driver. I just sort of leaned on these guys for advice. Where do I go? And sports car racing became the direction. There's just greater opportunity, more manufacturers involved, more sponsors, more teams, more money, more opportunity, more seats. There's you're not just talking 22 seats, in IndyCar or whatever the number is. And I was aware of the American Le Mans series. They made one stop in Canada every year at Mosport. We would go, my dad and I and my uncle, and watch the American Le Mans series cars. Ron Fellows was racing, in that series with Corvette. So it was kind of like that became the new goal. I want to race American Le Mans series. And so I started looking at all of the teams that competed in the IMSA lights, prototype lights. This series only lasted for, I want to say it started in like 2009 and ended around 2013 or 14. And these were Pro Mazda, like Star Mazda formula cars with a body on them. So they looked like prototypes.
Before you actually get into the sports car stuff, so when you finish USF 2000, I understand like you got your mindset on a goal that you're going to figure this out no matter what, but there's probably a lot of downtime in between those seasons and finding your next seat.
Yeah, the time in between, the off season, it was at that point, that 17, 18 years of age, it was all just about trying to raise money. Like that's all I thought about. I even hired a student out of the local college. I think I got him for free actually, as like who was in automotive marketing, and I figured, I could use your help. Uh, he would come over, and we would meet basically in my bedroom, and I had a desk set up for him, and I had a desk set up for me, and we would just hustle. Like we would just be on the phones, emails, creating flyers, just trying to raise sponsorship dollars to go racing. We finished the USF 2000 season in 2008, finished third, didn't have the money to go to Atlantics or Indy Lights.
Like also, dude, finishing in 08 and trying to raise, $300,000 to $400,000 in 2008, 2009, like not the best time.
Sure. Yeah.
What's like the benefit that so I get when you're 13, 14 years old in Formula Ford, you were able to raise some money. I get that, right? Like people, that's almost like it's a cool thing to a few $100, go for it. But what's the benefit at this point that if you're asking for a $50,000 or $60,000 check from a company, is that a tax break? Is that just their, what would you say is the benefit, especially if you're looking at some of these lower level series that are kind of getting pro, but they're not big TV viewership or anything like that?
Yeah, at that point, you're basically selling events. You're selling hospitality, networking opportunities. These wine and cheese VIP events is basically what we were selling. The logo on the car meant nothing. The viewership meant nothing. There wasn't any viewership in those junior ranks. So it was basically hosting VIPs and building events around it. We would, a day of golfing with the race car driver, and then come to the track, sit in a suite, have wine and cheese and watch the driver, in the race. network, bring current customers and bring prospect customers and let them intermingle, and hopefully your current customers, sell the prospect customers on how great of a,
Sure.
company this is, or what have you. But that's basically what we were selling.
Yeah.
So yeah, 2009 American Le Mans Series became the new target, the new goal. I looked at the roster of teams, and I figured what teams are also, because there were a few that were racing in the Prototype Light Series, because I figured no one's just going to put me in the big show after one season of Formula Ford and one season of USF 2000. I was still inexperienced and young, but if I could get in the door with a team who is in the big show, competing also in a junior level, and just prove myself to them at a junior level, I figured that's got to be the way. That's my path. So there were three teams that were racing American Le Mans Series and Prototype Lights. The first team was BK Racing, and they were running a Mazda Lola LMP2 car in American Le Mans, and also Prototype Lights. They ended up going bankrupt, or they closed their doors at the end of the '08 season, so that one fell off the table. And then there was two other teams, Primetime Race Group. They were running a Dodge Viper in GT2, and then also IMSA Lights. And Intersport Racing, they were running a Lola AER LMP1 car in the top category of American Le Mans. Naturally, I was interested in the prototype versus the Dodge Viper, so I pursued Intersport Racing. And I remember calling. The first answer I got was, we're only running the Prototype Light series for one of our sponsors. One of our sponsors that is with us in the American Le Mans series, the CEO or one of the co-owners of the company is a racer, but he's not going to be in our LMP1 car. He's going to be in the Prototype Lights car. That's the only reason we're doing the series. We're not interested in a customer car or what have you. Damn, I'm
Running out
going to
of
try. They're
options.
running out
Yeah.
of options here. So I was pretty persistent with them, and I think I begged and pleaded with them a few times. Fast forward like a year or two later, and I'll get to that, but I remember being out for dinner with them in Dublin, Ohio, and they said to me, you were so persistent, and that was the only reason why we eventually gave you the chance. And sometimes I think persistency works, and sometimes it's probably an absolute turnoff. And so it could go either way. They agreed to run me. I told them I could generate 140,000. I think they wanted 200, so they only ran me for like 3/4 of the season. But we won races. I think I won 4 races of the 8 that I did, or of the 10 that I did. I think they were pretty pleased. And so I got to test in their LMP1 car at the end of the season at Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course. I remember the day like it was yesterday. They had my name on the car. It was so official. My dad was there with me, and we thought, like, man, this is big time. Like this thing had like 850 horsepower, twin turbo, carbon fiber brakes. And I'm coming out of something with 200 horsepower, steel brakes, very little downforce. And so it was a huge step, a huge jump. But the test went really well. It was one day in the car. I didn't put a wheel wrong, and I went quicker than the team drivers that were in that car that season. I got in a little bit of trouble from the team owner. Actually, I think he said I was pushing too hard. I was in a little over my head, or something. I was like, I'm just trying to prove myself.
The car was in
Um,
one piece. Yeah. I mean,
the
you didn't.
the car was in one piece. Yeah, didn't
Okay.
drop a wheel all day. I
Okay.
think it was maybe just the level of risk that I took, but
Sure.
I think it also earned some respect. It had to have, because they then gave me a full-time offer for 2010. There was a new class, a new category being introduced to American Le Mans Series in 2010. It was a rough time financially, I think, in the market, and car counts were dropping in the series. There was now only a handful of LMP1 and LMP2 cars, a handful of GT cars, and this is supposed to be the pinnacle of sports car racing in North America, and one of the top series in the world. And So they introduced a spec prototype class called the Le Mans Prototype Challenge, LMPC. It was basically an LMP2 chassis with an Orica LMP2 chassis with a stock LS3 Corvette engine. So it was a pretty affordable prototype for teams to run in American Le Mans Series. So Intersport said, we want to run this new class. And they said the budget was going to be about $1.5 million operating costs to run the car for a season. They said, we will finance the operating costs and you'll be the full-time driver if you can buy the car or if you can find someone to buy the car. So that's what I did. I found an investor, bought the car. It was about a $450,000 race car. I had to do a deal with the investor that I'd pay him back.
Yeah, it's not cheap. Okay.
No. And so
it's like Kyle Marcelli LLC, and then you just go bankrupt at the end of the season and write it off. And,
yeah.
Damn.
So I find an investor who buys the car. I do a 2-year deal with him that I'm going to pay him back plus 10% interest. And I made it. I'm, at the Sebring 12-hour in March of 2010, doing the national anthem, about to take the green flag in my first America Le Mans Series race. So the very unconventional way of getting there, but I was there.
How old are you at that point?
So I was 20.
So you're 20 years old. You just bought a $450,000 car, basically.
Yeah.
If you crash that car, you're fucked.
That detail's foggy. Thankfully, I didn't crash it. At least nothing major. But I think the team was covering crash damage. They were covering the operating costs for the season, but I had to get the car to them.
Yeah, I got you.
And the car had to be insured, obviously, to protect the asset for the investor.
I didn't know that you can insure. I thought you couldn't insure a race car like that because it's such high risk.
There's companies that do it, specific racing insurance companies that do it, and still do today. But your premium is like $10,000, $15,000 per race.
Yeah.
So it's not cheap.
You were really betting on yourself, man. Right? Like 10% interest on a $500,000 investment, and that you're going to pay back in 2 years. Like, yeah. What was your plan to even do that? Sponsorship? Like, you're not really winning money for winning LMPC.
There's a
races.
bit. There was so the prize money was decent. It was about $25,000 to win in that class of American Le Mans. But yeah, I wasn't getting paid that year. The team basically said, we're gonna bring you into the American Le Mans Series with us. You're gonna be the full-time driver. We're gonna fund the operating costs. You got to buy the car. You're not getting paid. I got a percentage of the prize money, and I was allowed to find sponsors that I could put on the race car and whatnot. So
what was the benefit for the team in that case? If they're covering the OpEx, you're bringing the car to the table, and you're collecting the sponsorship dollars, where are they getting the money from?
They're not. I mean, you don't get into this sport to make money, at least not most teams. The race team was a hobby for the owners. The owners had business outside of the race team, and the owners funded the race team because it was a passion.
Okay.
And that's what they were doing with the Lola LMP1 car that they were racing in American Le Mans. That was all self-funded by the owners. They secured their own sponsorship as well, but yeah, they weren't making money. So I think at that time, when you look back, think, wow, that's high risk. And I probably would never do that again, knowing what I know now. But I didn't know anything. I was, I didn't know, I guess, the value of that money or the debt or the risk. I was just, again, so focused on becoming a race car driver and doing whatever it took. So got going. We had some pole positions that year, had some podiums. I don't think we won a race that year. We were on the podium a few times and had some pole positions in qualifying. It was enough and it was able to generate some sponsorship that year, which I, paid towards the investment. But my success that year was enough to negotiate a salary for the following season. So I think it wasn't much. I think I was now getting like $75,000, but it was one step in the right direction. I was now getting paid to drive a race car.
Man. Yeah, I mean, $75,000
Yeah.
you're not at that point, you're not like a top 5 racer in the country. So, the way I understand is that most guys in North America aren't really, it's pretty hard to generate a salary in motorsports, but on a professional level, unless you're really in a commercial series or the top of a non-commercial series.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I think the sport is thriving right now. But yeah, so at that point, it was now 2011. I was back with the same team in the same car, earning a paycheck, driving a race car in American Le Mans Series, generating sponsorship, paying the investment off. I wasn't able to do it in 2 years. I had to renegotiate and get a third year out of that deal. Eventually, I
Hopefully it
owned the
wasn't
car.
compounding interest.
No,
So.
no. So eventually, I owned the car. I spent 2010 until 2013. So I was with that team for 4 years. It changed names a few times, changed ownership actually a few times, but I stayed. And eventually, I owned the race car. Investor was paid off. I think that was by the 2012 or 13 season. And then the new owners of the team bought it from me. So it was perfect. Sold the car to the team, kept driving it, and was getting a paycheck to go racing. That was my story to the American Le Mans Series.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's wild, man. Because then you did American Le Mans for
I basically continued American Le Mans Series until it was bought by NASCAR. So American Le Mans continued until 2014, and then it became the Tudor, which is a watch company. They were the primary sponsor, Tudor United Sports Car Championship, and then it became the IMSA WeatherTech Championship, which is what we know now,
yeah.
which is owned by NASCAR. I continued to race the LMPC car from 2010 until 2014. And then I had new management at the time, a driver by the name of Stefan Johansson, a Swedish driver, made it to Formula One, drove for Ferrari, McLaren. He and I co-drove together in 2013 for the 12 Hours of Sebring. We finished second, and then we co-drove together again for the 10-hour Petit Le Mans in Road Atlanta, and we won the race. And then he took me under his wing and his management for 2014, and that's when I got my first Ferrari drive. It was with Scuderia Corsa in the 458 for the 2014 season, and I was employed by that team for that season. I only did 4 races with them that year, but
That's a pretty
basically,
big deal, though. Like
yeah,
that's huge, yeah.
yeah, it was a conscious decision to actually get away from prototypes. It was after 4 years, I had won races, pole positions in LMPC, and it wasn't really opening doors for me. Like, I was just sort of stuck in that class. I wanted to drive for Corvette. I wanted to be a factory driver for GM.
That was
And
a Ron Fellows sort of,
yeah, that was, it just seemed natural.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, the LMPC thing wasn't really opening doors. So that's when it was a conscious decision. Okay, I need to get out of prototype and into GT, because I think then I'll be recognized a little more by the car manufacturers.
Dude, I mean, all right, so Stefan Johansson hooked you up. He's the, you kind of overshot that a little bit. Hey, I got a seat at Ferrari. This is a pretty big deal. That team you're mentioning is pretty well known on a global level, frankly, at Ferrari. So how did that come about? He introduced you. I think is it Giacomo Mattioli is running that team.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's a funny story how it all went together. So yeah, we're now in 2014. I had switched teams, and I won't mention the team name, but we did the first race of the year, the Rolex 24 at Daytona. And then we go to the second race of the year, the 12 Hours of Sebring, and the car doesn't show up. And I call Stefan and say, "Hey, Stefan, I'm at Sebring right now. I'm supposed to be racing in the 12-hour this weekend, and the team says the car's not coming. Like the money didn't come from their sponsor, and so they're not running the car." And so I thought I was going to be sitting on the sidelines. Stefan was actually scheduled to drive for Ferrari that weekend for Scuderia Corsa, and he went to the owner, Giacomo, and said, "Pull me out and put Kyle in." that was how I got my drive, and it went well. The result wasn't so good. We had some electrical issues in the race, but I ended up running the quick lap. I think it was the quickest lap of the race in like the final hour.
Wow.
And that's
That's
what
that's an, that's a huge thing that he did for you.
oh, it's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that just a thing where he really, really took you under his wing and was like, let's give this kid a shot? He's well past his career at that point, right? This is sort of just him in the golden years.
Yeah, I think that was just it. Stefan, had reached Formula One, and that was the highlight of his career. And now he was, really just sort of scaling back in a sense, doing some endurance GT, races here and there. But it was still a big deal, and
Yeah.
super grateful
When
for
you
that
guys were
opportunity.
yeah, I mean that's wild, man. When you guys were teammates, phrase it how you want to, were you turning sometimes quicker lap times than he was? He must have seen something special in you.
Yeah, I assume that was the case.
Okay.
Yeah, it was good. Like I said, we finished second and first in the two races, and yeah, just kind of hit it off. I think it was around the time he wasn't really managing too many drivers. Scott Dixon was his main focus. He had sort of brought Scott through Indy Lights and into IndyCar, and still managed Scott to date. What he did for me was a huge deal, and it was almost like off the record in a sense. Like it wasn't super official, the relationship he and I had.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. Because then I guess I'm not going to say from there things start to snowball even easier, but racing for that team is a huge deal. So very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Giacomo's team was very successful. They won the championship 2 or 3 years in Grand Am, Rolex, GT, and IMSA WeatherTech. Um, and so that 2014 season, when I was brought on, it was only when they entered a second car. So they had the first car was kind of the primary car, and those seats were already filled. But every so often they would enter a second car, and that's when I got plugged in. So did the four
Sure.
races, and that was kind of the end of that deal. The team, Scuderia Corsa, started to scale back and actually shift, I guess, how they operate as a team, and became a little more customer oriented. And so it sort of had me looking for other opportunities, and I just continued to seek opportunities within the GT category of the sport. That's when I drove for Ramo Ferri and his Ferrari team that was now in the 488. Drove for a team out of North Carolina, CRP Racing, in the Audi R8 GT3. So just a number of GT cars kind of over the years from 2014 really up until present. Was in the Lexus program in 2018, and then with Acura in the NSX in 2019, 2020. And now kind of fast forward to where I am currently with Wayne Taylor Racing.
That's a big deal, right? The 488, the R8, the Lexus RCF, and the NSX. Thoughts between them, feelings. You had mid-engines in two of them, three of them. No, two of them. You had rear engines in a few of them. You had one that's a Ferrari. Like, do you have an affinity for one over the other?
Naturally, you always gravitate towards a Ferrari. Yeah, the 488 is just such a beautiful race car, and so special to drive, easy to drive. And I guess I'm half Italian too. My father's side's Italian, and my grandparents never watched a single race of mine. They don't, from my Italian side grandparents never watched a single race. When I told them I was racing a Ferrari, it was like the Pope was coming to town. That was they were so excited to finally started watching the races, and yeah, there was something special about that brand. And now the 296 is out, and I think it's going to be a pretty dominant race car.
Yeah, it's beautiful, that car. My gosh. When you're getting into a race car now, you're a little bit more of an established driver. The first 3/4 of your career, you were really bootstrapping it. You really had to prove yourself at every time. You still have to prove yourself at every time. Have you gotten more comfortable though? Were there a set of nerves when you were younger versus now you feel just you're more confident, you've established yourself, you got something to fall back on a bit? Or do you really feel that every time you're getting into a car now, it's still, you've got to perform because you will lose potentially your career?
I think it's a bit of both. The nerves never really go away. But I can think back to my early career actually puking before races. Like I was that nervous that the butterflies were so strong. Um, that doesn't happen currently, but you still get nerves. You get little butterflies, and that's a good thing. I think it's healthy, and they're only there until you get strapped in and get going, and then you don't even think about it. But it's sort of the lead up, the build up. You're nervous because you don't want to let yourself down. Really, you're nervous because you want to do well. You don't want to let your team down. It's the pressure, really. It's the pressure that I think I put on myself that creates those nerves, and it's healthy, and they're still there. And then the second part of your question, every time I get in the car, I feel like I have to prove myself, and I don't know if that's normal. Truthfully, I don't know if drivers at the top of their game in Formula One, IndyCar, sports car, NASCAR. I've never asked the question to others, but personally, yeah, I feel that every time I'm in the car, I have to prove myself.
But do you feel like there's a risk of losing the seat tomorrow if you don't prove yourself today? Because I feel like at an earlier point in your career, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, whereas now I've got to assume a bit more certainty.
Yeah, I think there's the feeling that you have to prove yourself because yes, there's somebody that's standing in line and ready to take your spot. Absolutely, there's far more talented race car drivers sitting on the sidelines than there are available seats. So for that reason, you feel you need to prove yourself. But at the same time, I do have a little bit of maturity also now that I can prove myself like in different ways. Like it's not always just about being super fast every time you get in the car because that's not always important. We could be doing other things. We could be doing a fuel save run. We could be working on shock settings and just doing test runs. Like speed isn't always, but when it is, then you feel you got to prove yourself. But now I think I can approach every situation from a more mature standpoint as to what is the team, what is the goal here, what do I need to accomplish right now, and sometimes I don't drive 100% because I don't have to, and so I think it's situational.
When you look at the function of luck and timing in your career, how much do you feel like came into play versus something that you've really just built and earned yourself? And I think you have to have a bit of both, right?
Yeah, you absolutely need both. Um, I think you can't be successful with just one of those. You need to work hard. You need to get the results, and you need to be in the right place, right time. And you need a little help. You need to be dependent also on outside, resources, people, finances. Like to do it completely on your own is impossible. You need a support team.
What do you think a team owner sees when they're looking at you now? What would you say the biggest values that you bring to the table are as a driver?
That I'm a white wolf. And what I mean by that is there's young talent, which are our lead engineer uses this term, is like the young talent is like the black wolves, like they're fierce and aggressive, take risks, take chances. They can be quick, but they'll crash. You know, then you get like the white wolves who have more maturity or experience and still have the speed, but have the wisdom. And then there's the gray wolves, and they're on the decline. They're like the retirement,
Yeah.
drivers that have just been around forever. But to answer your question more seriously, I think what I have now is experience,
Yeah.
is maturity, wisdom, and I'm so far still able to hang on to the speed.
Yeah.
You need the speed, number one, but you need the wisdom and the maturity to make decisions. To answer your question earlier, the young drivers now get in the car and feel they have to prove themselves every single session. If it's practice, if it's a warm up session, if it's the pace lap after the race, and with experience, you realize that you're a tool for the team to do a job. Sometimes that's about going fast. Sometimes it's about saving the equipment. Sometimes it's about saving fuel, whatever it might be. So,
Do you feel that there was a specific point in your mind when you changed from a black wolf to a white wolf?
yeah, I think that was probably like 2 years ago. Yeah, yeah. I think joining the organization that I'm with now, Wayne Taylor Racing and Andretti Autosport, they've opened my eyes up to what you really are to the team, and that's what they use the term, like, you're a tool for us. And before,
That sounds very comforting.
yeah, like, before it was like, I'm, Kyle Marcelli, race car driver. It's all about me. I'm trying to prove myself and go fast for me. And now it's like, it's for the team. It's for the team. It's like, it's no longer this selfish role.
Sure.
It's for the team. So I joined this team in 2021, but one of the biggest, one of the best teams in sports car racing. And yeah, I think they've just sort of opened my eyes up to what my role is, really. And so this is a bigger picture.
Like, really interesting. Had no idea about any of that as your path to getting where you are. So really appreciate it, man, and stoked to follow you in the next few years.
Thank you, Cole. It was good to catch
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, dude.